She told herself it meant nothing. The music was loud. The chandeliers blazed like captured stars above 500 wolves who had dressed in their finest and pretended the realm wasn't fracturing at its seams. There was wine. There was laughter. There was the kind of gilded, breathless noise that people make when they are desperately trying not to think about something. And there was him, the rival Alpha King. King Dorian of Valdris, with his silver-streaked hair and his easy smile and his hand held out toward her like he had all the time in the world. She took it. She told herself it meant nothing. Her name was Lyra, and she was very, very good at lying to herself. 3 months ago, she had stood in the great hall of Veldara and watched Aldrich Blackmore, her alpha, her fated mate, the man whose name the bond had carved into her chest like a brand. Look her in the eye and say the words she had never believed he would say. "She is not mine." He had said it in front of the Council of Seven, in front of 500 wolves who had all gone very, very still, in front of Lord Cavan of the Northern Pack, who had smiled like a man collecting a debt, and Lady Thessaly, who had pressed her silver-haired head down like she was praying, and Brennan, Aldrich's own beta, his most trusted second, who had gone the color of ash and not moved a single muscle. She is not mine. I do not claim her. The bond is a mistake of the moon, and I reject it. She remembered the sound it made, the bond breaking. It was not dramatic. It was not a crack of thunder or a roar of power. It was quiet, like a thread being cut, like something small and essential going silent in the middle of a chest that had learned to build its entire architecture around that one steady hum. She had not cried. She had been too proud and too scared and too deeply certain that if she opened her mouth to make any sound at all, the only thing that would come out was something that could never be taken back. She had walked out of that hall with her spine straight and her hands loose at her sides and her face set to the expression she had learned from a lifetime of being underestimated. Perfectly, devastatingly blank. She had not looked back. She should have looked back. The village of Ashford had taken her in the way small places taken strays, with quiet pragmatism and no unnecessary questions. She had a healer's hands, and they had wounds that needed tending. It was a simple transaction. She had preferred it that way. For 2 months, she had been Lyra the healer, not Lyra of House Vance, not the woman the Alpha King of Veldara had rejected in front of his entire court. She had set bones and brewed medicines and listened to the kind of ordinary troubles that people bring to healers, children with fevers, old men with aching joints, young women with hearts that had been broken in the quiet and ordinary ways that have nothing to do with fated mates or iron thrones or the machinations of councils who would sooner see a woman destroyed than allow her to be inconvenient. It had almost worked. Almost. The bond had not disappeared. He had rejected it, rejected her, in public, with words precise enough to constitute a legal severance under the law of the 7 packs. But the bond did not care about law. The bond was older than law. The bond was older than the councils and the thrones and the political marriages and the careful bloodline calculations that wolves used to pretend they were something other than creatures made of instinct and moonlight. It burned, not the bright, electric burn of activation, not the searing heat she had felt the first time his hand had closed around her wrist to stop her from falling in that corridor 3 years ago. This was different. This was the burn of something being kept alive against its will. A coal refusing to go cold. a lighthouse sending its signal into a sea where no ships were sailing anymore. She had learned to sleep through it, mostly. King Dorian had come to Ashford on the pretense of a border inspection. She had known it was a pretense because Ashford was nowhere near the border. She had been in the market, her basket over one arm, her healer's satchel over the other, when the outriders came through with their silver and black banners snapping in the autumn wind, and the village had gone quiet with that particular quality of quiet that means royalty. She had tried to leave. She had genuinely, sincerely tried. He had seen her from the back of his horse with those pale gray eyes of his that missed nothing, and he had said her name. Not Lyra, the healer. Her name. Her real name. The one she had not heard spoken aloud in 2 months. The one that still sounded, when spoken by the wrong person, like something she was supposed to answer to. Lady Lyra of House Vance. She had stopped walking, not because she wanted to, because the training of a lifetime is very difficult to overcome when someone invokes your name and your house in that particular tone of voice. She had turned around. She had met those pale gray eyes. She had said, very precisely, "There is no House Vance anymore, and I am no one's lady." He had looked at her for a long moment, and then he had said, with that easy smile that she was already learning to distrust, "Then you won't object to dining with a man who is no one's king until morning." She had said no. 3 times, across the span of an afternoon, she had said no. And then she had said yes, because she was tired, and she was lonely, and he had not looked at her like she was a problem to be managed, or a power to be harvested, or a wound on the kingdom's body that needed to stop bleeding in public. He had looked at her like she was a person. Like she was, specifically and particularly, a person he found interesting. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her like that. The ball was in the great hall of Valdres Keep. His territory, his wolves, his chandeliers burning above 500 guests who knew exactly who she was and watched her with the specific, avid attention of people witnessing something they will discuss for years. The rejected mate of Aldrich Blackmore, dancing with Dorian of Valdres. The woman the Alpha King threw away, on the arm of the Alpha King next door. She could feel the whispers. She had grown up reading rooms the way other people read books. Survival had made her excellent at it. And she knew, without looking, exactly which clusters of nobles were calculating the political implications and which ones were simply enjoying the spectacle of someone else's humiliation. She kept her chin up. She smiled at Dorian, who was saying something charming about the wine. She told herself again that it meant nothing. The bond burned, low and persistent, like a word she couldn't stop repeating. And then, at the far edge of the ballroom, something changed in the air. It was subtle. The way a room changes when a door opens somewhere distant, not a draft exactly, more like a shift in pressure. A murmur moving through the wolves closest to the main entrance, like a wave through still water. Heads turning, the specific instinctive attention that predators give to the arrival of something larger than themselves. Dorian's smile did not change, but his eyes did. He said, very quietly, still smiling, "Well." She turned. Aldrich Blackmore did not enter a room. He arrived in it the way weather arrives, not through any door in particular, but present suddenly, everywhere at once, changing the temperature of every surface it touched. He was in traveling clothes, not court dress, and he had not changed, and he had not waited, and he had apparently not slowed down for anything between Veldara and Valdres Keep, because there was still road dust on his boots, and something in the set of his jaw that had nothing to do with travel fatigue and everything to do with a man who had been running towards something for a very long time, and had just arrived. His eyes were the pale gold of a winter moon. She had forgotten in 3 months how they looked when they found her. She had convinced herself she had remembered correctly, that there was nothing particular about it, that the bond was the reason it felt like being struck by lightning and not anything specific to the way he looked at her. The breath left her body. The bond, that coal that had spent 3 months refusing to go cold, that lighthouse in a sea with no ships. It roared back to life like kindling catching all at once, like a tide coming in with enough force to take everything that wasn't nailed down, like something that had been waiting and finally heard its name called. She hated it. She hated it with every shred of dignity she had spent 3 months rebuilding. She hated it the way you hate the thing that proves you were right to be afraid. She did not move. Neither did he. For one long, suspended moment, across a ballroom full of 500 wolves who had all gone entirely silent, Aldrich Blackmore stood in the doorway in his road-dusty boots and looked at her like she was the only fixed point in a spinning world. And then he walked toward her. Dorian's hand was still at the small of her back. A light touch, the touch of a man who understood courtesy, who had not once in 3 weeks overstepped or pressed or made her feel like something being collected. She had been grateful for that. She was still grateful for it, technically, even as every wolf instinct she possessed was screaming something ancient and incoherent about territory and mates and the particular quality of the silence that falls before a fight. Aldrich stopped 3 feet away. He looked at Dorian first, a long, measured look, the kind that contained multitudes without expressing any of them, the kind that made lesser men feel the sudden, visceral urge to take several steps backward and reconsider their choices. Dorian, to his considerable credit, did not step back. He met that look with those pale gray eyes and said, with the mild, pleasant tone of a man who has done nothing wrong and knows it, "Blackmore, this is a long way from Veldara." Aldrich said nothing. His eyes moved from Dorian to her. She had spent 3 months preparing for this moment in the dark of sleepless nights when she rehearsed everything she would say, every precise and devastatingly correct thing she would tell him about what he had done and what it had cost and why he had no right to look at her like that. She said, "You have no right to look at me like that." His jaw tightened. Something moved through those pale gold eyes that she couldn't entirely identify. Something complicated and deep and very, very close to pain. He said, "I know." 2 words, stated as a fact, not a defense, with the kind of plainness that meant he had not come here to argue. She said, "You rejected me. In front of the entire council. In front of everyone." "I know. You said—" Her voice was very steady. She was proud of that. "You said the bond was a mistake." Something in his expression fractured. Not dramatically. Not the way faces fracture in stories, with tears and declarations and sweeping gestures. Just a small, specific breaking in the careful architecture of a man who had spent his whole life learning to show nothing. He said, "I was wrong." The ballroom was so quiet that she could hear her own heartbeat. She could hear Dorian breathing beside her, careful and still. She could hear the distant musicians who had trailed off into uncertain silence. She could hear, somewhere in the crowd, the very small sound of someone's wineglass being set down on marble with precise and unnecessary care, as if the sound of it might disturb something that was teetering on an edge. She said, "You were wrong. Yes. You stood in that hall. You looked at me. You said the words. You chose to say them. I know what I did. Then why? And here, to her absolute fury, her voice almost did not cooperate. Almost. She had not come this far, had not rebuilt herself from nothing in a village where no one knew her name, to let her voice break in front of 500 witnesses. She gathered herself, the way she had gathered herself every morning for 3 months, and she said clearly, "Why are you here, Aldrich Blackmore, Alpha King of Veldara, the most powerful wolf in 7 packs, a man who had commanded armies and ended wars and never once in his life knelt to anything?" Looked at her with those pale gold eyes full of something that had been a very long time coming, and said, "Because I can't not be." The simplicity of it hit her somewhere behind the sternum. Somewhere the bond had been burning for 3 months, and she hated herself for the way she felt it land. She said, "That's not an explanation." "No," he agreed, "it isn't. I have an explanation. I have several. I will tell you all of them, every word, every truth I owe you, and I will not ask you to accept any of them on faith." His voice was very low, not quiet with restraint, quiet with the specific, expensive care of a man choosing each word like he was paying for it. "But I am not going to tell them to you here, because 500 wolves are watching, because you deserve better than a confession performed for an audience." Dorian spoke then, and she had almost forgotten he was there, which said something, though she was not ready to examine what. He said, still pleasant, still mild, "Lady Lyra is a guest in my house. She is here by her own choice. She leaves by her own choice." A pause. Should she choose to stay? Aldrich looked at him, that long, measured look again, and then, with the deliberate restraint of a man controlling something very large and very dangerous, with the absolute minimum of visible effort, he said, "I am not here to take. I am here to ask." Dorian said nothing. His hand was still at the small of her back, light as a question. She felt the bond like a tide. She felt her own fury, precise and legitimate, and 3 months deep. She felt the thing she had told herself for 3 months was dead, that she had killed it thoroughly enough that it couldn't ambush her in a ballroom in Valdres Keep on a night she hadn't been ready for. She stepped back from Dorian's hand, not toward Aldrich. Back. Her own step, her own space. She said to Aldrich, "You have until dawn." They walked in the gardens of Valdres Keep, where the moonflowers bloomed white and cold along the stone paths, and the ancient oaks stood the way old things stand. Without apology, without hurry, simply present in the way that outlasts every crisis brought before them. He told her everything, not with the careful, measured cadence of a man managing her reaction, with the blunt, direct, occasionally brutal honesty of a man who had decided that the only thing he had left to offer that was worth anything was the truth, all of it, without embellishment or softening. He told her that Lord Cavan had come to him 3 nights before the council gathering with documents. Old documents. Records going back 15 years, to the fall of House Vance, to the night her parents had died in the fire that had not been an accident. He told her that Cavan had told him the bond was a trap, that she had been positioned deliberately by surviving members of House Vance's enemies to be near him, that the bond itself was suspect, that claiming her would destabilize the council, fracture 3-pack alliances, and potentially cost him the eastern border in the next seasonal campaign. He told her that he had believed it for 3 days, that he had sat with those documents and that voice in his ear and the political calculations that had been drilled into him since childhood. And he had believed it because it was easier to believe it was a trap than to believe what he actually knew, what the bond had been telling him for 3 years. what the wolf in him had known from the first moment she had come into a room and changed the temperature of every surface it touched. He told her that he had stood in that hall and said those words and felt the bond snap like a tendon under a blade, and that he had told himself it was necessary, and that he had been a fool. He stopped walking. He faced her in the cold garden light, with the moonflowers white around his boots, and the ancient oak watching from 30 yards away, the way ancient things watch, without judgment, without urgency, simply bearing witness. He said, "Cavan fabricated the documents. Brennan found the original records 2 weeks after you left. Your parents' death was Cavan's doing, not theirs. House Vance was destroyed because your bloodline carried something he needed to eliminate, a beat, and the bond was never a trap. The bond has always been real. I knew it was real. I chose not to trust it." She said, very quietly, "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve to know the truth about your family." His voice was rough, low, resonating like distant thunder. "And because I have spent 3 months feeling every moment of your pain through a bond, I told the moon was a mistake, and I cannot—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I cannot keep pretending that what I did was anything other than the worst choice I have ever made." She did not forgive him. Not then, not in that garden, not in the cold hour before dawn with the moonflowers watching and the ancient oak not judging. That was important. She needed him to know it was important. She said, "I am not the woman who left Veldara. I am not the woman you stood in that hall and discarded in front of everyone who was supposed to witness a king choose his queen. That woman is gone." She met his eyes. "Whatever I am now, whatever comes after this, I will not be treated like something you can reject and reclaim at your own convenience." "No," he said, "you won't. I need you to understand that I danced with Dorian tonight because I chose to, because he treated me like a person, because I am allowed to be a person who makes choices, even choices that make your wolf want to tear down the walls." "It already tore through the gates," he said, very quietly. "Arrived 4 hours ago." Dorian's men were very patient about it. Something that was absolutely not humor moved through her chest. She refused to acknowledge it. She said, "You cannot just arrive. You cannot tear through gates and stand in a ballroom in road-dusty boots and say 2 words and expect 3 months of damage to be undone. I don't expect that. Then what do you expect?" He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the moonflowers. Somewhere distant, an owl called once and went silent. He said, "I expect to earn it, whatever time you need, whatever it costs." His voice was the low, rough tone of absolute truth, with nothing behind it but the weight of what he meant. "I am asking for the chance to show you I understand what I threw away. I am not asking you to trust it today. I am asking you not to close the door." She looked at him, the pale gold of his eyes in the garden light, the road dust on his boots that said he had not stopped, had not slowed, had come with the urgency of a man who had finally understood what running toward something felt like after a lifetime of standing still. The bond hummed between them, not the desperate roar of the ballroom. Something quieter, the sound of 2 things that had been apart for a long time, sitting in the same space, remembering. She said, "The door is not closed." She held up one hand. "That is all I am saying tonight. The door is not closed." His exhale was not dramatic. It was the kind of breath that a man takes when he has been holding something for a very long time and has only just been permitted to set it down. He said, "That is enough." Dawn came the way it always comes after the kind of night that changes things, not with trumpets, not with ceremony, but with the slow, inevitable lightning of a sky that has no interest in human drama and simply continues to turn regardless. Rose gold along the eastern ridge of Valdres Keep's outer wall. Silver in the frost on the garden stones. The moonflowers folding closed one by one, their white faces pressed together like people going to sleep after a long night. She stood at the garden's edge. He stood 6 feet away because he had not moved closer than she allowed, and she had not allowed closer than 6 feet, and he had accepted this with the focused, careful attention of a man who had learned, too late but thoroughly, what it meant to respect a boundary. Inside the keep, she knew Dorian would be awake. He was not the kind of man who slept through consequences. He would be drinking tea by now, or reading, or standing at a window with those pale gray eyes that missed nothing, understanding the shape of this night without needing to be told. She thought about his hand at the small of her back. The ease of it, the uncomplicated, courteous warmth of a man who asked nothing and offered much, who had looked at her in a market in Ashford and said her real name without making it into a weapon or a wound. She said to Aldrich, without turning, "Dorian is a good man." A silence. Then, "I know. He treated me well. I know that too. I want you to know that I see the difference." She turned then, because she wanted to say this to his face. Between a man who treats you well because you are a person, and a man who treats you well because he wants something from you. I know which one you have been. I know which one you are trying not to be anymore. She paused. I am watching. Aldrich held her gaze. The pale gold of his eyes in the early light was not the burning intensity of the ballroom or the fractured rawness of the garden. It was something else, something quieter, something that had been stripped of performance and was simply, uncomplicatedly present. He said, "Then I will give you something worth watching." She did not go back to Veldara that morning. She told him she would come when she was ready, and not before, and that he did not get to decide what ready meant. He had said yes, and I understand, and nothing else, because he was learning, slowly, imperfectly, but visibly, that the economy of words that had served him as a king was not sufficient for this, and that some conversations required him to listen rather than command. She went back inside. She found Dorian in the library, as she had expected, with tea and a book and the particular quality of stillness that dignified men assume when they are granting someone else's exit the respect of not watching. She sat across from him. She said, "You knew who he was when you brought me here." Dorian looked at her over the rim of his cup. "I knew who you both were from the moment I saw you in Ashford, yes. And you brought me here anyway." "I brought you here," he said carefully, "because you are interesting, and I enjoyed your company, and because I thought perhaps a room full of witnesses and a dance with a rival king might accomplish something that 3 months of quiet had not." She looked at him for a moment. "You wanted him to come?" "I wanted," Dorian said mildly, "to see what he would do when the thing he had discarded was standing in someone else's arms." A pause. "I found out," she said. "You tore through my gates." He said that with a small smile that she thought was, underneath its mildness, entirely satisfied. She said, "This is an unusual thing for a king to do." "Most kings," Dorian said, "do not tear through gates for the people they reject." He set down his cup. "That one did. That tells you something, Lady Lyra, whether you choose to do anything with it or not." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "You're not in love with me." "No," he agreed easily. "I am interested in you. There is a meaningful difference. And I like you too well to compete for something that was never mine to compete for." She said, "Thank you." He inclined his head. she said. For Ashford, for the ball, for the gates. Dorian smiled. Go be a sovereign, he said. Stop being a wound waiting to close. She left 3 days later. Not because he arrived. He did not arrive. He stayed in Veldara, or he did not. She did not know exactly, and she had not asked. And he did not send messages or wolves or political pressure or any of the instruments of power that a king has available when he wants to compel an outcome. She checked for these things precisely because she was watching, because she had said she was watching, and she had meant it. There were none. What there was, on the second morning, was a letter. 1 page. His handwriting, which she had seen before only in official documents, and which here was different, not smaller, not less certain, but stripped of the formal architecture of court correspondence and simply direct. It said, Lord Cavan has been removed from the council and confined pending formal proceedings. The documents he fabricated have been entered into the official record as evidence of his crimes against House Vance. The true records of your parents' service to Veldara have been read aloud before the full council and entered into the permanent archive. Their names are restored. I cannot restore what was taken from you. I can make certain the truth exists in a form that cannot be buried again. There is no obligation attached to this letter. I am not writing to collect something. I am writing because you deserve to know, and because knowing should not be conditional on anything you decide about me. The door you did not close. I will be here. She read it twice. She folded it. She put it in her healer's satchel, in the interior pocket where she kept the things she needed to protect. She thanked Dorian again, properly, with the kind of gratitude that requires complete honesty, and she delivered it completely honestly. He received it with the gracious, uncomplicated warmth of a man who had given something freely and expected nothing for it. She rode out of Valdris Keep at dawn on the 3rd day, with the road to Veldara stretching ahead of her and the autumn light cold and gold on every surface. She did not ride fast. She had time. She had decided she was allowed to have time. She thought about the bond, the way it felt now, not the desperate burn of the rejected months, not the roaring tide of the ballroom. Something that was knitting itself back together, slowly, the way bones knit, the way wounds close from the inside out, imperfectly at first, with the evidence of damage built into the new structure. She thought about her parents, their names in the archive, the truth that had existed all along, buried under a lord's fabricated documents, and 15 years of silence. The fire that had not been an accident. She thought about the woman she had been when she walked out of that hall 3 months ago, and the woman who had stood in the garden at dawn and said the door is not closed, and she thought that the distance between those two people was the shape of something she had built out of nothing, alone, in a village where no one knew her name. She was not going back to Veldara to be the woman Aldrich had rejected. She was going back as the woman she had become when there was no one left to perform for. That was not a small thing. She understood that it was not a small thing. She thought about Dorian saying, "Go be a sovereign," with that mild, entirely satisfied smile. She thought that he was not wrong, exactly, though he was certainly the most infuriating, helpful person she had ever met. She thought, I am not returning because he came for me. I am returning because I have chosen to. The distinction was everything. She arrived at Veldara's gates as the sun was going down. The outriders saw her coming while she was still half a mile out. She knew this because the bond, that refashioned, imperfect, building from the inside thing, told her the exact moment Aldrich knew she was coming, a flicker of something so precisely controlled that she almost missed it, like a man keeping very, very still so as not to startle something that had finally come close. Brennan met her at the gates, silver-streaked dark hair, weathered face, kind eyes. He said, "Lady Lyra." And then, without any prompting and without any theater, he bent his head. She said, "Your king is not coming out to meet me." Brennan said, "He thought you might prefer to come in on your own terms." She considered this. She said, "He was right." She rode through the gates of Veldara. The black marble floors of the great corridor caught the last of the evening light through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The silver filigree walls, the ancient weight of a palace that had stood for 1,000 years, that had absorbed 10,000 political crises and personal catastrophes, and survived all of them with the same stone indifference that only very old things manage. She walked through it, and she did not feel small. She had spent years in this palace feeling like something that was tolerated rather than included, like a note played in the wrong key, like a woman constantly one wrong step from being reminded of her place. She had not fully understood, until she left, that the smallness had been installed in her by circumstance and other people's agendas, not by anything true about her own dimensions. She walked through it, and she felt like herself. Aldrich was in the throne room. Not on the throne. He was standing at the tall windows at the far end, in the last red light of the sun, in plain, dark clothes, without the armor, without the formal court dress, without any of the architecture of power that a king puts on when he wants to remind people what he is. He heard her come in. She knew he heard her. He had heard her since she crossed the gates, the bond singing like a wire between them. But he did not turn immediately. He gave her the room. He let her come to the center of it, to stand in her own space, to establish the terms by simply being there. Then he turned, the pale gold eyes in the red evening light. She said, "I'm not here because you came for me." "I know," he said. "I'm not here because of the letter, or the council, or Cavan's removal, though those things are. They are not nothing, and you know they are not nothing." "I know. I'm here," she said, "because I decided to be. Because I looked at the door I had not closed, and I looked at the woman I had become in 3 months of being no one but myself, and I decided that she..." She stopped. She found the words, that she was worth bringing back, not leaving in a village, not disappearing into a breath, and that what we are, what this bond has always been, is worth walking back toward, carefully, with both of us understanding what it costs. He said, yes, that was all. Yes, 2 letters, weighted like a vow. She crossed the last of the distance. Not all of it, half. She stopped half a distance away and looked at him with the precise, level gaze of a woman who has survived being discarded and has come back not smaller, but larger for it, and said, "You kneel." It was not cruelty. It was not theater. It was the concrete expression of something that needed to be made real in the body, in the actual physical world, before any of the rest of it could begin. He knelt. Alpha King of Veldara, ruler of 7 packs, most powerful wolf in the realm, on one knee on the black marble floor in the red evening light, with no audience and no performance and no political calculation, simply in front of her, where he had needed to be for 3 months without knowing it. He said, from that position, with the voice that commanded armies roughened down to something that had no armor in it at all, "I am asking your forgiveness, not your mercy, not your compliance, not your performance of something you don't feel yet. Your forgiveness, when you have it to give." "I know you don't have it yet," he continued. "I know it may take a long time. I am not asking for today." His eyes were steady on hers. "I am asking for the permission to work for it." She looked down at him. The bond hummed. The evening light moved on the floor. She said, "Get up, Aldrich." He stood. She said, "Start working." The sun finished setting. Outside the throne room windows, the first stars appeared over Veldara, and the moonflowers in the palace garden began to open their white faces to the dark. And somewhere in the keep, a door closed quietly, and the bond between them, imperfect, damaged, knitting slowly from the inside out, settled into something that felt, for the first time in 3 months, like the steady hum of two things existing in the same space and choosing, daily, to remain. She was not the woman who had left. She had made certain of that. She was the woman who had come back, on her own terms, through a door she had chosen not to close, and that, all of that, made every difference in the world.